Eleanor Roosevelt said you gain strength, courage, and confidence by every experience in which you really stop to look fear in the face. You're able to say to yourself, I have lived through this horror, I can take the next thing that comes along. You must do the thing you think you cannot do. Our next speaker displays all three of these traits and is going to share not just her own personal story of abuse, but her experience of the criminal justice process. This does come with a trigger warning. If you find yourself affected, please remember you can call the 24-hour DSA helpline on 0808 802 1414. It is my honour and privilege to introduce you to Amanda Brown, who has very bravely waived her right to privacy to share her personal experiences with you today. Thank you, Amanda.
The video's not starting here for some reason. That me now? Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so for those of you who don't know who I am Amanda Brown, and I am a victim of childhood sexual abuse. I was 29 when I disclosed my abuse and subsequently went to the PSNI to file a report. It took over 3 years, 40 months to be exact, for I made a formal statement with the PSNI until my case was heard in court. That was 40 months of not knowing what was happening, not knowing if I was supposed to seek legal counsel, not knowing if I needed to find my own legal representation. I wasn't clear on the entire process and didn't know that I was not considered a victim, but a witness to the crime. The court case that I gave evidence in was 10 years ago, and I am aware that there are some changes that have happened since, but we still have a very long way to go if we want to get it right for victims. I can only reflect on my own personal experience, and I know as a victim I deserve more than what I received. And I know that without the support of my family and my own tenacity and focus to stop him from hurting another person, I wouldn't have gone as far as I did. Many victims don't have the family support or the determination that I've had. And we all deserve some support throughout this extremely difficult process. Following making my formal statement, I was given details of Nexus by the PSNI, and those sessions ran out pretty fast. At that time, I wasn't in a position to pay for counselling outside of this, and the wait was incredibly stressful for me. With the added worry of not knowing if I needed to pay for my own solicitor, it put pressure on relationships, and I struggled with keeping up with everyday life. I can only describe it like opening Pandora's box, and once it has been opened, you can't put all that trauma back in again. You're just left to deal with all of this trauma and no idea how to process it. I didn't feel safe knowing that he could turn up at any time, and he was a violent man, so my fear was not irrational. Victims deserve a right to better support through counselling type services during the wait period. We deserve a right to an automatic, appropriate restraining order, both before the court case and after. Bail conditions are sometimes not enough, and they didn't bring me a sense of security. We should also have a right to legal counsel and representation in court. I was alone in court apart from witness support and some family who could bear to be in court to listen to the sordid details of my abuse. I was interrogated by the defence barrister. Every day for 5 days I was in the witness stand. My abuser was in the stand for half a day, and that doesn't seem fair either. I would have felt more prepared and better supported if I had a right to some legal representation, someone who was in my corner as the victim, where I was seen as a witness to a crime. Sorry, not where I was seen as a witness to a crime. We are aware that there isn't a level playing field in these cases, and the system is set up in such a way that it's far too easy for the defence to cast a modicum of doubt, leading to a not guilty verdict. And it's often one person's word against the other, and as a victim you feel as if you're the only person this has happened to. So open justice is important because it means that other victims may have the courage to come forward if they have been the victim of abuse. In my case, if I had not been aware of other victims, I would never have found the courage to speak up about my abuse, and more still have spoken out since. I know that the time frame between reporting and court is shortened somewhat, but why does it still take more than 12 months to gather information on a case? I understand there is a process, but why is it so long? Often it can take victims a long time to report an offence, and when they do, they want to know what is happening throughout the process. However, with the lack of communication and support from the time at which a victim reports a crime up to the court stage, there's a risk that victims will withdraw from the process out of frustration or uncertainty. Vulnerable victims and those victims who, for whatever reason, feel unable to give evidence in a courtroom setting should be given every possible support to assist them in giving evidence. Not every victim is able to talk about what has happened to them in a court hearing. So as much as possible should be done to ensure that they have their voice heard and remain part of the process. And this would be particularly effective in a case where there are multiple victims and only some are able to take the stand. My cousin Gemma could have had her case heard alongside us, but she was told that her evidence wasn't clear enough and that she was left feeling that she wasn't heard and that she wasn't believed. 2 months after the verdict, she hanged herself. And while I don't blame the legal system or PSNI, I do believe that with the right support in place, she would still be with us. She deserved the right to specialist support that would have helped her to piece together her jigsaw of memories. Sorry. In my case, my abuser was found guilty and sentenced to 4 years in prison. And as a victim, I lived with the impact of my abuse daily, and I can still struggle massively with it on some days. The sentence doesn't seem fair, and historic sentencing guidelines should be reviewed. My abuser filed an appeal, and I am not fully aware of the guidelines around filing for an appeal. I tried to navigate the appeals process, but it was full of legal jargon and above my head. We deserve a right to information in plain English. I wasn't made aware of his appeal. I wasn't made aware that his appeal was being heard. And it was ironically, I was on a bus going past the courts when I received a phone call from a friend who had just seen in the news that he was out on appeal. At the very least, I deserved the right to be informed of this appeal before it happened, and I feel I deserved a right to be present with representation as a victim in that appeal hearing. The appeal was heard 4 years after the court case, a matter of weeks before he was due to be released, and I believe this was a tactic by his legal team. Again, I feel this was an injustice against us. Had the appeal been heard in a timely manner, we may have gone through the process again, potentially securing a guilty verdict for a second time. With the timing of the appeal and his imminent release date, we decided not to go through all the pain and trauma of a court trial for no additional gain. Further to this, as he was released on appeal, we had no security. He was released as an innocent man and therefore posed no risk. Victims deserve the right to know that they will be safe from harm and the potential of a revenge attack from their abusers. These are my experiences, and while I have received fantastic support from Nexus and the Witness Support Service run by Victim Support, I do feel that my experience may have been a lot less traumatic had I have received the support that I feel I should have had a right to. The system is broken and it needs to change, but how do we make the changes required? Not only do we need to look at the overall system for the current victims, and I am aware there's a great deal of work being undertaken on this side, but we also need to make changes within society. I believe this change needs to happen from the ground up, and something I feel very passionate about is within the education of our children. Currently, there is a minimum content requirement for relationship and sexual education classes, meaning that all of our children are not receiving the same standards and content of education around relationships and sex. Our children have a right to the same standards and content across all schools, from nursery right up to upper sixth. Our children deserve a right to equal and fair education around safe relationships, body autonomy, coercion, and healthy family relationships. This message could be as simple as safe adults don't ask us to keep secrets for nursery school children. Our children have a right to protection, and I firmly believe that can begin with education. My son deserves a right to the same level of information and education as his cousins in another school. He deserves to know the difference between what a safe adult is and what behaviours are okay and what are not. He deserves the right to be taught that he can say no and a right to understand what coercive behaviour is. I firmly believe that every child we educate fully on the issues of childhood sexual abuse, domestic abuse and violence against women and girls, the more light we will shine in this world and the fewer shadows an abuser has to hide. Not only do we need to make changes to the minimum content order, but we need to review what they're being taught. We can spend hours teaching our children the importance of consent and labelling our private parts appropriately, but all of that is wasted if we don't teach our children about manipulation and setting boundaries. Many cases of abuse begin with manipulation and coercion, not the act of abuse itself. My abuser got away with what he did for so long because I was brought up not to challenge an adult no matter what they were doing or saying. I was manipulated into sacrificing my body in order to protect my family. Our children deserve a right to know that they will be believed, they have a team on their side, and they have a right to be protected from harm. Our children are our future, and we owe it to them to give them the tools to prevent abuse from happening, and the support to know that if it does happen, they will be protected. I look forward to a future where abusers are more afraid of abusing someone than a victim is of speaking up. Thanks for listening to me.